Hey, I'm Jake Bodine. Welcome back to the God Behind Bars podcast. I'm excited about today's episode. I have a very special guest by the name of Shawn Serfass, who spent 6 years in a federal prison, overcame drug addiction, ultimately surrendering his life to Christ, and is now out as an entrepreneur himself and has started his own ministry, giving back to underprivileged kids through Second Chance Mentors, which is the name of their nonprofit organization. But Shawn, it's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. And before you get into it, I just want to thank you and say how awesome this platform is. I've been watching God Behind Bars for years, cried to it multiple times, man. What you guys are doing is really special.
Yeah, no, I tend to find out that I still cry almost on every one of the videos, especially the family reunification stuff. So I appreciate what you do for the kids of those that come from underprivileged communities or have been kicked out of school. And I know that it's your job to kind of interrupt the cycle, or what your mission is, before they even ever walk down the road of drugs or prison or crime. Yep. And I can't tell you how important that is. For our listeners that don't know, there's about 10.8 million kids in the U.S. that have a parent that's incarcerated, and statistics show that 85% of them are more likely to go to prison themselves. And so the ministry that you do is extremely important. And if you have a passion for that in any form or fashion, you can look up Second Chance Mentors. I know that they would appreciate the support, prayers, volunteers, funding if you have the ability to give towards something like that. All of that I would encourage you to do, because your work is so important, man. So
thanks, Jake. That means a lot.
Well, I'd love to dive in with you and just kind of hear your story, maybe take us back all the way to your childhood. Yeah. We had talked a little bit about this before the podcast, but you grew up in a pretty normal environment. And then ultimately, as you got older, experimented with different drugs, which ultimately led to your incarceration. Why don't you just start from the beginning and share as much of your story as you want?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Virginia Beach. My father's military, so he was gone a lot, back and forth. That was back during like Iraq and Desert Storm and all those. And so we were raised a lot by our mother at that time, and she's doing great now, but she struggled with drinking at that point. So that had kind of been brought into my life at a young age. And then at about 10, 11 years old, she decided that she kind of was going to go about her own way and kind of live her own life. She never like disappeared on us, but she decided that she didn't want to be part of like the family anymore. So that was kind of hard. And around that same age, the reason I put this out there, and it's kind of embarrassing, but you know, Revelation 12:11, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the sharing of our testimony. So I went through this, and I feel like it's important to say it, because 3 out of every 5 men have been sexually abused at some point in their life. So around that age, 10 or 11 years old, I was abused sexually by 2 different babysitters, one male and one female, which kind of led me down a kind of a shady path, especially when it came to like looking at porn and things like that at a young age. So flash forward a couple years, my father then moves to Philadelphia. He takes me and my sister with him. And my mom, she comes later to Philadelphia as well. But at the time, my dad's working, and it's just me and my sister, so I have a lot of free time. So by like 12, 13 years old, I'm hanging out in the woods and drinking and smoking weed, and it started really young. And I played sports, so soccer and baseball were really big in my life. And I was able to maintain that through most of the years of high school as I continued down the path of harder drugs and more drinking. And I still had a couple scholarship looks come like senior year that fell through, because my senior year I got in trouble before I was 18, thankfully, with a decent amount of marijuana, which caused me to lose all those opportunities. I ended up going to a Division II college in upstate Pennsylvania called Bloomsburg University. First semester I did okay. But then I was introduced to cocaine, and I wasn't able to handle that or control it. And I ended up failing out of school, and I was just living in the frat house that I joined, selling drugs. Like, that's all I was doing. It was sad, actually. Had a close encounter with the police that luckily I got out of. And I called my mother, and I was like, Mom, because my mom was living in Texas at this time, because my mom was originally from here. And I said, Mom, I need to change this up. I don't want to live this lifestyle. Mom, can I come down there? And she goes, yeah, but I'm not going to get you a plane ticket. So she got me a Greyhound bus ticket. I'll never forget. It took like 6 days to get from Pennsylvania to Texas on this Greyhound. Some of the wildest things I've ever seen were on that bus ride. But so I get down to Texas, and my mom's like, look, you're not just going to hang out around here. You need to figure out what you want to do. So I'm like, okay, I know it'll fix everything. I'll join the Marines. I thought that like joining the military would fix me, right? Went to boot camp, got through boot camp. Well, I actually like ranked up in boot camp, which is rare. I was a squad leader. I thought I had it figured out. I loved the Marines. I really felt like I had like structure and discipline. I had gotten in great shape. Come home for leave and went to a bar one night, and there it was, drugs again. And I made that same mistake that I'd been making over and over and over. I ended up getting high while I was on leave, went back to report, and popped a drug test, and now I'm kicked out of the Marines. So now I've lost the scholarship, failed out of college, kicked out of school, come home, kicked out of the Marines, or come back to Texas, kicked out of the Marines. So now I'm just like, well, what's next? So my mom gets me a job selling cars at this car dealership, which was, it was good and I was good at it, but I had just, and this is when I met my first wife, and she was, I don't know how else to put it, really, she was already involved in selling drugs. She was basically like the connect, this little petite 5-foot girl. You would have never known it. I had no idea. We went on the first date and she was like, yeah, I'm on the run from the police. And I was like, well, for what? And she goes, yeah, I got caught selling drugs. And I was like kind of blown away, honestly. So me making not very smart decisions, I moved her in with me that day because she was on the run. So I was like, just come live with me. And that's kind of when the whole like drug dealing stuff got kind of blown out of proportion. I wanted her to be legal with her stuff, we talked her into, or I didn't talk her into it, to calling probation and being like, hey, I want to get my stuff right with probation. So she did that, and they were like, yeah, just come on in, we'll get you set up. So she went up there, and that wasn't happening. They arrested her right away. So I got left with, basically, I say drug dealer in a box, all the drugs, all the money, all the connects, and like just left to me. And instead of, she kind of ran like a small little safe operation, but I wasn't able to do that because selling drugs to me was like, I didn't even do it for the money. I did it for the whole, like, look at me, that false sense of people needing me.
Yeah.
My phone ringing all the time, like feeling important. I was so insecure, but being a drug dealer, like, filled that or fixed that. You know what I mean?
Wow.
In an artificial way. Like, It's not in a good way. We already know, everyone that's watching this already knows what I needed to fix me was the Lord, but I didn't know that at the time. So I was reaching for whatever I could find. So I take this little operation, I blow it up, and then,
Which, by the way, that's the first time I've ever heard that perspective of it. But you, beyond the money aspect of it, because that's usually the reason why, right? I want the shiny things, the nice things, but it gave you value in people's eyes.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with money. I didn't save the money. I was just blowing it. It was totally about that feeling important, feeling like valued and needed. People always, like, it was a total insecurity thing that it fed inside of me. So I'm not able to like keep it contained because, like with what I just said, I want it to be this whole look at me thing. So I'm dealing with anybody who wants to deal with me. Now is where my ex-wife, she was very smart and controlled with the way she did things. I'm not meeting new people, stuff like that, but I just didn't have that sort of discipline. So a few years later, she gets out, and we have my son, and literally a few months after we have my son is when my trouble starts with the police. So I get arrested. There's a guy that I was getting it from, and he got in some sort of trouble with them, so they were watching him, and we continued to get our stuff from him, and they were just keeping a ledger of everything that we had bought from him over this whole time. So when they finally did arrest me, I think I had like a very small amount, nothing that would have like caused any sort of like trouble, like maybe probation or slap on the wrist. They were like, you're in big trouble. And I was like, no, I just got this little bit, I'll be fine. I didn't know there was a difference between the state and the federal government. I had no idea. This is how naive I was, because I had never been arrested like on any real level. So I'm thinking to myself, I'll get probation.
Which at this point, this is the state, right?
It was a state people that arrested me, yes, but the case was already under federal investigation.
Got it.
But
you didn't know that.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
They actually gave me this detective's business card, and they were like, tomorrow, call this lady, and if you do that, we'll let you go. And I was like, okay, I'll definitely call her. Driving home, I ripped the card up and threw it out the window, and I was like, literally, I said, thank you, God. I don't know how you got me out of this, thinking that I was good to go, right?
Yeah.
Ridiculous. 3 months after that happened, I'm sitting there with my son. He's no more than 6 months old. And I hear this boom, and I look up, and 6 DEA agents kick my door into my apartment, all AR-50 or whatever they carry, drawn on us. And I'm not like, I'm kind of bigger, but I'm not a tough guy. Like, I'm really not. Like, I was crying like a 3-year-old. They were telling me to shut the baby up. They were like, shut the baby up. And I was like, I can't even figure out how to stop myself from crying.
Yeah.
And then they think they hit a jackpot. They're searching every room in the house, every drawer. And I had stopped. That day that they let me go home, done. I didn't do anything else after that. So they didn't find anything in the house, which was kind of funny. But they took me to jail that night. I spent one night in jail. And then they let me out. That night they let me out, or the next morning, because they knew that I was at that point the sole custodian of my son. I don't know if that's the right word, custodian, but that I was the main provider for my son. So they wanted to, and they also knew I had 0 criminal history. I had no, I wasn't a flight risk. I wasn't any, there was no violence or anything. I had no sexual crime. There was nothing that I was a risk, So they let me go home that next morning, and they said, you're on pretrial release now, which I didn't realize what meant was now they're going to start the paperwork to figure out, like in the federal system, they do a pre-sentencing investigation. So the probation officer finds everything they can find against you, and they put it in a report, and they give it to the judge, and it's always going to be like way longer than you're going to get, right? So my pre-sentence investigation came back that they wanted me to do 19 and a half years in federal prison for my first crime. And I couldn't figure out what was going on with this. I was mortified. And when I looked through the paperwork, this is the first time I found out that it wasn't just that little bit of drugs that I had in my pocket. They were charging me with almost 4 keys, which is like 10 pounds of methamphetamine.
Yeah, because during their investigation, they were basically keeping a ledger of everything you were purchasing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't explain that very well. So they had this, basically the guy that I was getting it from let them know he bought this much from me over 6 months. So they charged me with every bit of it. They call it ghost dope in the federal system. So I thought I was getting probation for this little bit of drugs in my pocket, and now they're trying to give me 19 and a half years. So right then is when I pled guilty, because fighting it in the federal system, you're going to get double the time because they take away the federal system is just a lot different than state. Because I wanted to get what's called acceptance of responsibility, which drops me 3 points down on the scale of how much time you get. So I pled guilty and was immediately that day detained. It was 1 week before my son's first birthday. So now this is where I encountered God again, though. So it's, prison, I want to say this real quick. Prison was the best thing that ever happened to me. Like, when I'm telling this story, I want to make sure that it's known that, like, I don't have any sort of resentments towards the police officers that did their job, or the prison system, or the judges, or the lawyers. Like God allowed me to walk through what I did so that I can come and tell this story right now and give hope to people, and I really believe that. So the first time they put me into a pretrial holding cell, this dude comes up to me, and I knew him from like the free world, but I was scared of him. 6'6". He's in one of those Aryan gangs, giant dude. I'm talking his arms are this big. And he comes up to me and he gives me a bag of coffee and a Bible. And he says, this is all you'll need. And he gives me, and this is the first day I've walked in. I've never been to jail before. I walk in, I see him. He gives me a bag of coffee and a Bible. And he says, this is all you'll need while you're in here. And like, I don't know. I still, to this day, like, I'm so thankful that that's the way he approached me, because I was terrified of this guy.
Who was he in the prison system?
He was a general for a very large, like, gang. You know what I mean?
But a believer.
Yes, a believer. But those guys, I never got associated with any gangs or nothing like that. I don't even believe in that stuff. But once those guys are in, it's really hard for them to get out. And so this guy was an avid believer, and he still is to this day. I still talk to him. He was able to get out of the gangs, and he's no longer part of that. But that was like my first, that was like the first time I talked to anybody in prison was him telling me this. And it really just stuck with me really hard. So I took it serious, man. I started pouring into the Lord. Like I was saying earlier, and this isn't like a good thing, but when I first formed a relationship with God again in prison, I was trying to use him. I was like, I want him to be like my little genie, like, God, if you'll just give me probation or give me 2 years, I'll never do anything like this again. I'll get it all together. But when I did get sentenced, I got sentenced to 13 and a half years. So instead of 19 and a half, they gave me 13 and a half years.
Hey, thanks for tuning in on another episode of the God Behind Bars podcast. I just wanted to take a quick second and encourage you, number one, as a listener, thank you for being a part of what God is doing in and through this ministry. We're just praying that he will continue to be able to share these stories all over the world and telling his story of what he's doing in the lives of people that are behind bars. If you've ever thought about making a donation or a gift towards the ministry that is happening here, I would love to encourage you to do so. You can do that by going to godbehindbars.com/donate. No matter the size of gift, it helps support the work that is happening in and through this ministry. And I want to thank you in advance and continue to tune in to this episode of the God Behind Bars podcast. Which let's talk about that real quick, because I think that that's common for a lot of our listeners, both in and out of prison. I know in my own life I've asked why 1,000 times, especially when I'm dealing with hardship, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of try to negotiate with God, like, hey, if I quit doing this, or if I start doing that, will you fix this in my life?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, like, we wonder, like, why do we have to go through these things in order to learn? Number one, I know that God identifies the heart, right? So even when we're negotiating, he knows what's at the depth of our heart. And are we truly going to change? But two is, I like to say this all the time, but God cares more about your character than he does your comfort.
That's good.
And so he'll put you in the most uncomfortable situations.
That's so good.
Even if it means disrupting your entire life, to ensure that your character on the other side of that is who he wants you to be.
That's so good. And I needed that original sentence of 13 and a half years. Like, just like you're saying, God knew what he had to do. If God would have given me a year, 2 years probation, I might not have changed. I might have gone right back out to doing the same thing that I did. So I'm sentenced to 13 and a half years, and they send me to my first prison, which is Oakdale, Louisiana, which at the time is a medium low security prison, full fence, barbed wire, like your actual prison. When I get there, well, the first thing I think to myself is, okay, right now I'm sentenced to 13 and a half years. So I'm going to have to do 11 or 12 by federal guidelines, 85%. I'm not just going to sit in here and waste this time. Like 10 years, I'm 26. I get out when I'm 36. Like, I can still have a life left. You know, I still had some positive, like, thinking about it. So I just start doing every single thing I can that's positive. Like, I'm all in. I volunteer in the chapel. I start teaching GED at the GED. Like, that was my job. I went to the library and taught GED class. I started these Bible studies. And I told you a little bit about the story earlier. This was the only fight I ever had in prison was these guys from another Aryan type gang. They said, hey, we know you don't we know you don't run with us, but you look like us, and you can't be doing this. Because I had a Bible study with white, black, Mexican. I didn't care. There was Asians. I didn't care what their race was. And I think one of the bigger things that they were worried about rather than the race was I didn't care what their crimes were. So I wasn't like, hey, let me see your paperwork to be in my Bible study. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't care if they had a sex charge. I didn't care if they had killed somebody. I didn't care, what drugs they were. Like, I didn't care if they were legal, illegal. Like, none of that mattered to me. Like, every single person at this table was a man that needed Jesus. And that was like my whole mindset about the whole thing. So I started this Bible study, and it was growing and growing. Well, those guys told me, like, hey, you can't do this anymore. You got to stop, because the reason I have a shaved head is because I have a receding hairline back to here. Yeah. Like, I don't shave my head because I want to look like some skinhead, I'm
a few years from having to do it myself.
Yeah, yours is looking good. Yours looks way better than mine. So I was like, no, I'm like, I didn't even want to shave my head. You know what I mean? Like, but, so anyways, that night I went to my room. I did use a word that I shouldn't have used when I was addressing them back. Like, you're not going to, anyone in prison knows you don't use the B word to anybody. And I was so fresh in prison that was something we threw around in the street. Yeah. Well, I did use that word back to them. So that night I'm in my cell, and all three of them walk up. One of them opens the door, steps in, and, I don't mean to like act like a tough guy or nothing, but I was handling him pretty good, that the other two had to step in and they start stomping me in the back of the head. Like, I got beat up pretty bad.
Which we talked about this earlier. And if you're listening on just audio right now, number one, Shawn is jacked. He's jacked right now as a human being. But back when you were in prison, you told me this, you were 300 pounds. Correct?
Yes. Yeah. So and I'll get kind of into that too here. When I went to prison, I was not in shape. The whole time I was on pretrial release, I was like eating pizza and drinking beer, depressed. Like my life was not figured out yet. So one of those things I said when it was about coming to prison to get my life together, one of them was fitness. So I just started getting all these magazines, all the stuff that I could study, and I just started focusing on how I can, mind, body, and spirit. I wanted it all to be together, And I started losing weight, started getting healthy, and all these guys on the yard, they call it, were like, hey man, whatever you're doing is working. Can we work out with you? So I had like 9-10 guys in the very beginning, mostly older gentlemen that I was training. I didn't know what I was doing at this point, but I would just run them around. Like they would just work out with me.
Yeah.
And the cool part of that happened was one of the guys was a doctor. We call him Doc. And he was like, Shawn, you have a gift for this. He's like, if this is something you want to pursue when you get out, I'm willing to pay for any certifications and stuff you want to get while you're in here. So while I was with Doc, I got 4 personal training certifications. I got a nutrition. I got a cancer recovery specialist certification. Like I just went in on all that because I couldn't afford it. I didn't have, and Doc really took care of me as far as like all the different, because he was a doctor who was in prison, but he was getting, he still did well. You know what I mean? Like so it didn't hurt him to be able to like help me out. So that was kind of cool. But to go back to those guys, they never messed with me or told me to not do the Bible study again. So like I don't know if they just, and it wasn't because I'm some tough guy, or it wasn't because they were scared of me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I really feel like they realized that my heart was about like
the right thing.
That, yeah. Mm-hmm. So they did tell me that I can't don't try to be over here with these guys acting like you're hard and then be over there with those guys having a Bible study. You got to kind of find your lane. So it never, I still, hung out with my friends and stuff. Like I wasn't like scared where I stayed away from them.
Yeah.
But I continued to do the Bible study, and I pray that that's still going on today. I don't know if it is or not. But then they sent me to a different prison. They sent me to Forest City, Arkansas, which was a camp. So Forest City, Arkansas didn't even have a fence around it. Like I could just walk off if I wanted to. Like we said, that there's, you got to deal with the marshals, and like no one really does that because
you have a world of problems for yourself.
And you have this luxury that if you're going to be in prison now, you don't even have it's really like it's a blessing to be in a place like that.
Yeah, you're incentivized to, hey, I don't want to go back to where I just came
exactly, from. And you're going back if you get caught running away or doing anything like that. And I had the best job. I was able to, where the COs, the correctional officers, had their own gym and like a CO center. There was 2 of us in the whole combat that would go there, and we would just clean the gym. But I got to work out for free, you know what I mean? Like I got to work out. So it was like the best job, and I was like, I had great relationships.
Not when no one else was in there. You didn't have to share the equipment or politic for it or whatever else.
No other inmates could work out there. Only the correctional officers.
Oh, okay.
It was the correctional officers' gym and like break area.
Yeah, so then definitely a privilege.
So it was really cool, yeah. So people were super jealous of that, which came with a lot of like people trying to like start stuff to get, because a lot of people wanted that job. You know what I mean? So people would try to like hate on you or say stuff to try to get you to lose that. Anyone watching this that's in prison, you know what that's like. People try to steal your job all the time if you have a good job. So then I did that. So I was there for a while. A huge blessing at Forest City, Arkansas was I got to go to East Arkansas Community College and get an associate's degree for free. They came and did classes on campus. So that was something I was really proud of. I don't even know if I can do this, but if you're watching this and you're in prison, take advantage of every single thing that's in there. Like all the classes, all the certifications. You never know when you get out what opportunity is going to be presented for you. So that's something that I'm really thankful that I did. Like anything I took advantage of it.
Which, and I would say too, is that like we talk about this often, is the greatest commodity in the corrections community is time.
Yeah.
We have a plenty of time,
yeah.
And to use it and not waste it is
That's
extremely important. So whether it's educating yourself, whether it's growing in your faith, whether it's learning on how to be a better dad or a better mom, whatever it may be, that you're building yourself up and you're laying down the foundation for the rest of your life, because the majority of us are going to walk out of those gates one day, and God has purpose for us, whether we're on the inside or the outside. And so taking advantage of the resources that are available to you are extremely important, and we want to encourage you to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome, and that's great advice. So now, and I just want to touch on this real quick, because y'all's videos, when you do the videos with with the kid and the dad, or the kid and the mom, and they haven't seen each other in all this time. And like, those are the ones where I'm really just like driving and I'm like reaching for tissues, crying, because I'll never forget, at that Forest City, Arkansas prison, they had this Father's Day program. And I'll never forget, my son, they let him come in the room. I had seen him. It wasn't like I haven't seen him. So it wasn't that like as extreme as the one that you guys do. But they let him come into the room with me by myself in the room. And it was just like, so I can just never, I always remember what that felt like, you know?
Yeah. What does that feel like as a dad, obviously, that's incarcerated? We have many listeners, some who've never experienced incarceration in their life. What kind of emotion does go through your head? Obviously, the absence of being a father. I know for many of the men and women that we listen or work with, they have children, and they still value the role that they play in their child's life. But what does go through your head, and how important that is that to your entire mental health, spiritual walk, everything, as you're trying to serve out the time that you're responsible for serving, but at the same time, not become this vacant idea in your family's hearts and minds?
Yeah, that's such a good way to ask that question too, because there's like so many different parts to it. Being a good father was something that was extremely important to me because I had such an amazing father. Not everybody has that same thing. So a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons we have our nonprofit, but a lot of young men have never seen what a good father looks like. You know what I mean? And there's even the correlation to go even deeper, and I don't mean to get off track, but that's why a lot of men and women can't understand how much God loves us, because because he's always referred to as the Father. But if they've never had that real father that loves them, it's hard for them to understand how this God who's like a father can love them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was so important to me to be a good dad. So that I'll never forget that day when he was able to come in and I was able to play these games with just him, and my mom didn't have to be holding him the whole time. And it made me want to do even better of while I was in there, staying out of trouble, because there's tons of ways to get in trouble in prison. There's plenty of drugs in prison. There's plenty of things that you're not supposed to have in prison. There's plenty of cell phones in prison. Like, there's so much temptation to get in trouble. But what that did for me that day was say, okay, Shawn, I don't know how much time you got left, because right before that, right then I still had all that time left. But right after that was when I was notified that they dropped that gun off my case because it was not legally held. I had a gun on my case that they found in the house when they came in my house that day. But they dropped that because I was not a felon at the time and I didn't have any drugs or money around it. So that took 5 years off my sentence. And then after that, they gave everybody in federal prison 2 years off, 2 years off for if they have no violence and they were just a drug crime. So all of a sudden, and I know that God did this way intentionally, gave me all that time, watched to see, hey, is he going to, I mean, I don't mean to say like it's all about me, right? Because this affected a lot of people in prison. But when I look at it myself with my relationship with God, I say that I feel like that he was like, I'm going to see if you're serious about this. And if you are, I'm going to, I'll take care of you on the back end. All those things, I can be your genie. You know what I mean? But it's not going to be on your time. It's going to be on my time when I know that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. The test, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's going to test you along the way. I want to see what your heart's like, how you're going to respond, even when you're not getting your way.
Yeah.
And are you going to stay faithful in everything that you've promised me?
Exactly. So then all of a sudden I went from 13 and a half years to like 6 or 7 or something like that. So right after that happened is when I got sent to an even lower security prison, which was Texarkana, where I did this residential drug abuse program. It was a year-long program, but it took that final year off my sentence that got me home. And that was an amazing program too. I wish that it would have had more Christ-centeredness to it, but it wasn't. It was a rational thinking program. But I needed that just as much, like how we can rationalize things like, oh, if they didn't get it from me, they would get it from somewhere. Or it's okay, I bought shoes for all the kids in the neighborhood with the money that I made selling drugs. Like, just the way we lie to ourselves to justify doing things was a lot of that type of stuff. And then just, taking responsibility for ourselves. It was a great program.
What with your walk with Christ, because obviously that's strengthened over time. Like, you talk about it from, hey, it was just kind of my get out of jail free card to now I'm a avid believer and it's the foundation to everything I have. What does that look like? Because I know it looks different for everybody, right? Yeah. Some people have a radical encounter with God where, boom, something heavy comes over me, something happens in my life, and then I'll forever never be the same, right? Others, it's a slow, progressive growth and getting to know him through relationship, all of that. What did that look like for you personally?
Man, that's a good question. And I would actually say that mine was probably more of the progressive thing. I went all in because of the peace that I felt. Like, I'm facing all this time, and I knew that it was going to be okay. I really felt like Jesus was walking with me through that beginning phase. And like, as I continued to get to know him more and to stay in community of other believers, it just grew and grew. I never had some sort of like hot flash over me, like, Lord talking to me. I never had anything like that, but I always knew that he was there, and then he was with me. Like, so mine was more of like the progressive one that you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, even for me in my own life, like, I never had a radical moment. But I definitely had, like, he used passion for me, right? Like, I began to burning passion in my heart, to, number one, know him more, but two is to share the same love, hope, and freedom and peace that I've experienced with other people.
Yeah, that's good.
And that passion just grew and grew and grew and grew. And so as that passion grew, so did my walk in relationship with him, because I wanted to know more about the guy that I was going to share with everybody else.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I know it looks different, because we have many guests on this podcast, some that encounter the Holy Spirit in a radical way, and then others that it's more of a progressive. And I want our listeners to know that it looks different for everybody. Just because you didn't have this crazy Holy Spirit encounter doesn't mean that he's not present in your life right now today. Yeah. And it's just a slow whisper and a progression in a relationship with him.
Yeah. And I think that what you said, and I never thought of it that way till you just said it, was so awesome, was I wanted to know more about him too, as I'm talking about him all the time. And like, so that kind of, and then as I learned about him, it's so, pick up that Bible, like it's so, you know what I mean? And I fall off. I'm not this perfect Christian. Like, I fall off and I struggle, and there'll be a week where my Bible doesn't get touched, but I feel like a lot of my growth in the Lord has come from trying to learn about him, so that's.
Yeah. And I think talking to him too, obviously the Holy Spirit exists for a reason, and not everyone has access to a Bible, and you can definitely still be in relationship by, one, talking to him, and two is listening for his voice and how he wants to guide you in your life. That's good.
That's when I've struggled with a lot, even like my prayer life. I mean, even up until like sometimes currently, and then I feel shame sometimes behind it. And I had to learn that that's not the point of it. Like, I think to myself, if I believe in this so much, how can I sometimes still struggle with prayer? Like, why am I not praying if I believe it so much? If I believe it has the power, why am I not doing it? And then I start feeling guilty behind it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But it's just something
the
we
guilt is the enemy.
100%.
Yeah. He wants to get you to stop it all together.
Yeah. So you just feel bad. Oh, like, you're a fake, you're a fraud. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that's just the enemy for sure.
Back to your story. We were talking.
Yeah. Sorry.
You got your credentials through your buddy Doc.
Yep.
And you began to kind of go down that journey.
Yeah. So we were right before I'm at Texarkana, and I'm getting out of prison. Mm-hmm. And my mom and my son come and pick me up at the door. Best day ever. I'll never forget that. Me and my son went straight to the soccer field and kicked the soccer ball around for like an hour. I couldn't get enough of him. And we went home, and I had to stay in a halfway house for about a month or so. And while I was in this halfway house, my life goals were to make $12.50 an hour. That was $500 a week. I wanted to get a low efficiency apartment. I wanted to get a car note and still have $1,000 or whatever left over for the month. Like, that was my goal. And God had such bigger plans than that. You know what I mean? So it's crazy how prison, and you guys would know this, prison can knock you down. Like, what you think that you're capable of will really drop really low, Mm-hmm. But don't fall for that. So I get a job making $12.50 at a gym as a personal trainer, and I'm stoked. I'm so proud of it. The guy who actually owns the gym was also a felon, an ex-felon, or however you want to word that. And man, I'm so proud. I'm making $12.50 an hour. I'm at the mall passing out cards, like getting people to come to this guy's gym. And like a bunch of people are coming to the gym, and then I meet this girl. And it's so funny because for 6 years I hadn't talked to any girls, right? Like, none. So I didn't even know how to approach her. So I did that whole, like, where I'm just kind of standing in the corner, like staring at her, really awkward.
Yeah, looking creepy.
Probably. That's exactly what she says. So,
yeah.
So I guess it's true. I didn't really even know how to approach it. Luckily, the owner was like, "Hey, I'm going to introduce you to Christy." So the owner introduced her to us, or introduced her to me. I didn't know how to use Facebook. She friend requested me, and I didn't know how to use Facebook. So I thought I was sending her a message, and I posted on her wall this like corny, like beast mode, like workout meme type thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, I just think it's funny. So we were continuing our relationship. We both found out that we went to the same church. So this is another thing that God started to arrange. We were both going to fellowship at the time on 7th Street in Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
And just at different service times. So we started to become friends. Our relationship grew. And at the time, I had just moved home to my mom. So I'm on home confinement. So if I'm not at work, at church, I got to be at home. And they're calling all the different places. Like, you know what I mean? When I get there to make sure I'm there. And my wife, or she's my wife now, Christy, if she was so down. And if I was at work, she would come to work. If I was at home, she'd come to my house. And this girl loved the Lord. God gave me, and this might sound a little bit like, I don't want this to sound vain. I don't want this to sound, but like my prayers were so, while I was in prison, what I was asking God for, like to the definition of, I want a small, petite, blonde hair girl with, that loves the Lord and, wants to start. Like I literally prayed exactly for my wife. Like it's so crazy. And God gave her to me, and my favorite thing about her was her walk with the Lord was so powerful, and that was her priority above all else. So I knew that this was right. So she says to me, Shawn, why don't we open our own gym? And I start laughing. I'm like, girl, I have a 490 credit score and $17 in my savings account. Like, I can't open a gym. Like, I think that's cool, but I can't do that. And she laughs, and I'm like, oh, I hope I didn't just lose her by telling her that. But a couple months later, she brings it up again. Like, Shawn, I really think the Lord's telling me that we need to open our own gym. And I was like, Christy, I don't have the money. Like, I don't have a way to do this. And she goes, Shawn, I have the money. And I was like, what? Like, I swear I had no clue that she had money like that. It was never brought up. She's so good with her money. She's not flashy. So I had no idea. So sure enough, I'd like to add this in there, not to pat myself on the back, just to show you how serious my walk was. Me and Christy waited until we got married to have sex. Again, I'm not saying that or to shame anybody. I just want, that's how serious we wanted God's blessing in all this, you know?
Yeah, it's important.
So,
hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the God Behind Bars podcast. This is Jake Bodine, one of your hosts here, and I just wanted to encourage you to like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to the God Behind Bars podcast, and then set your notifications to be alerted every time we upload a new episode so that you can be up to date in hearing what God is doing in and through the men and women that are behind bars. Continue listening to this episode of the God Behind Bars podcast.
I meet Christy. She walks me through and helps me figure out the divorce with my ex-wife. My ex-wife me and her are still to this day very close and good friends. So there was no ugliness. My ex-wife signed over custody of my son to us because she knew that was the best for him. And then, so this is all, get out of prison, get custody of my son. Me and Christy get married about 9 or 10 months later. So within the first year of being out of prison, all those things happened, and we opened the first gym. It was crazy. It was just like, go. And people are like, what? Like, you just got out. How are you doing all this? And it wasn't me. I didn't have anything to offer. You know what I mean? I was just being obedient in the different steps that were coming. So then the first gym's doing well. It's, it's not making a ton of money, but it's successful. It's able to take care of itself, and it's supporting us at home. Then I get asked from a Arlington homicide detective to come share my testimony at an alternative school. So that's a school where the kids get kicked out if they for something, they get sent to that school. And I was nervous about this, so I wore some really cool Jordans, and I made sure that I looked fly to these kids. And the kids were, there was 33 young kids, and they sat there, and they were so, I've never seen, they paid attention to every word I said. They were asking great questions. These kids were dialed in to this story. And you're not supposed to talk about God when you go to schools anymore, but I do. I put it out there. If they're going to tell me not to come back, I'm like, okay, but I do. I put it out there. At the end of it, the counselor even saw how these kids were so dialed in. He was like, how many of you guys have a male father figure, role model, mentor in your household? And only 3 of the 33 kids raised their hand.
Wow.
I cried driving home. I know I'm a big softie. I've said I cried 4 times, but I do. And so driving home, I'm crying. I'm like, Lord, okay, I know what you want me to do. I get it. I'll do it. That night I went home, legal Zoom. I don't know what I did. I filed for my 501c3 to start a nonprofit called Second Chance Mentors. And luckily I was sharing a vision with different people, and there was a couple people that believed in what I wanted to do and, sewed into us to get us started. I mean, nothing crazy, but enough to do like the basics, like, hey, get some shirts and some stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I shared it with a principal in Mansfield, Texas, who was the head of Mansfield's alternative school. And she goes, I'll give you a spot once a week if you want to come in and you want to do this every week with the boys. And I was like, heck yeah. So so every Tuesday, I missed it today for this, which is well worth it. But every Tuesday from 12 to 1, I go in and she gives me like 5 or 6 students. And we just hang out and we just talk. I'll do like different lessons with them. Sometimes we'll talk about goal setting. Sometimes we'll do job interviewing. Sometimes I'll teach them how to tie a tie. Sometimes we'll just play games. So we just find that community. Now, if any of the kids ever want to apply to be part of our program, Second Chance Mentors, they can do that. The reason I make them apply is because I want them to feel like they had to make an effort to be in it. It's not just like, oh, you're signed up, So they fill out an application, they apply. And then what we do with the kids once they're in the program is we get together twice a month. These are their 5 requirements. They have to do short-term and long-term goals every month. They have to do 2 hours of community service. They have to have a sit-down meal with their mentor where they just get together and talk about what's going on. And they have to be passing. I say they have to be passing their classes. Some of these kids bust their butt for C's and D's, even sometimes a failing class. Yeah. So we kind of took that off of like a requirement to earn their like prizes, but they have to have good attendance and no run-in with the police or anything like that. So if they're following those 5 things, every 3 or 4 months we take them and we buy them a brand new pair of sneakers. So that's kind of been like a reward to them for doing what they're supposed to be doing. Right now we have 14 boys in the program. We've graduated 4 kids. 4 of the kids that graduated, 2 of them, this is so crazy, 2 of them, the principal called me when they were in the office, literally signing themselves out of school. She was like, Shawn, can you get up here? What are you doing? And luckily I was right there because I have an office right there. So I got up there and I was like, what are you doing? And I knew one of the kids because he had been, he goes, man, it's cold. I don't want to come to school anymore. I was like, he literally had 4 months left. So we went all in with this kid. He stayed in school. He got in our program and he graduated. So that's something I'm just really proud of, just seeing the difference of like, but he didn't have anybody at home.
Yeah.
He never, sorry, I just feel like I'm just rambling.
No, this is so good. And like, I think the importance of like, especially for our listeners, understanding that the male role model or any role model in a child's life at those early development stages and how important that is. And just speaking to a lot of different men and even women that are incarcerated over the years and the absence of father figure in their life and how a lot of that is kind of weaved into the trajectory of where their life went and the pain that it caused. And so the importance of what you're doing, number one, again, I can't reiterate it enough, just how important it truly is. But those of our listeners that you do have children, and even though you're incarcerated, you may feel like you can't play a role in your child's life, or maybe you've been absent for a season of time. I just want to encourage you, number one, that the importance, even if it's picking up the phone and calling them,
so good.
It's extremely important to have that relationship and to encourage them to be different and to become the best version of themselves.
That's so good. And just to piggyback on that, Jake, you can mentor your kids or other kids from prison the same way that I'm doing it out here. And 2 things with that. Just ask them how their grades are. Check on them. Like, check on the different things that you would be asking them if you're out there, because a lot of these kids don't have anybody asking them, hey, how's your grades? Hey, how's football going? So they quit because no one cares about them doing those things. So you can definitely still do that while you're incarcerated. But another thing... and
those milestones, they mean a ton.
They mean a huge... Yeah,
I mean, we all know. If you look back over your life, the milestones that people missed out on in your life, like and how it affects you today. And then we tend to cause the same heartache and pain in other people's lives, quote unquote, unknowingly, but just checking in, even if you can't attend the game, wanting to know how it went is just as valuable as going physically.
Just as important.
Yeah.
And then the second part I want to say on that to anyone who's still incarcerated, a lot of times I feel like when we're in prison, we think, how can I be a mentor? Like, I'm a felon. Like, how can I get out and help some kids? But honestly, like, you guys are the ones that can actually help these kids, because a lot of these kids don't look at I've brought men into our mentorship program who are super successful and have it all together and have always had it all together. And you know what? These kids that we deal with, the kids that are troubled, the kids that are already getting in trouble, they can't relate to these guys. And they can never form a bond. But then someone who's been in trouble shows up and says, yeah, I got in trouble for selling drugs. These kids are like, what? That's what my dad did. Or I'm kind of already doing that. Now they can relate to you. And so you can actually have more significance when it comes to mentoring kids when you get out. So don't I don't know if that makes sense. And I don't mean to sound corny, but.
No, you're good. And Shawn, that leads me to my next question. Let's talk about the importance of legacy. Number one, as a father, but two is someone who's on this entire on the fence of, man, I don't know if I'm into this whole Christianity thing or the idea of Jesus or whatever. What would you say to them and the impact that it makes on their overall legacy that they're going to leave with their life?
That's good. And as far as the legacy of their faith as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So and in prison it's really hard also while you're in prison, because there's that stigma and that cliche of oh, you're just going to leave it at the door. A lot of people do that, So I think that it's important that you commit to it and go all in on it, because the difference of my life before and my life now is I'm no longer having to look for things to fill me up like I used to, whether it was women or drugs or cars or the attention, just attention. That's what I was saying now. And it's so real. Sometimes it might not seem as real, but now that hole is filled with the Holy Spirit now. That hole is now where I can feel a joy and kind of a peace and contentment of just being regular. I don't have to have stuff or look at me or be flashy. But even more so than that, my son is walking in the Lord. My son is a leader at his youth group, and my son started a Bible study in his school, which it hasn't taken off yet, but I'm telling him to be positive, But that to me is what's more important when it comes to the legacy of the faith, is what I'm going to leave to my son and what my son is going to hopefully carry on to his son. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but
yeah. Well, I guess the follow up to that would be why Jesus? If I'm sitting on the fence and I don't know if I want to say yes or no to this, and obviously presented with many other versions of God.
Yeah.
Why Jesus? What's so important about him and what's different than anything that you've tried yourself?
That's good. And I'm trying to answer it in a way of my personal, I don't want to give you the cliche answer of because he died on the cross for our sins, and you know what I mean? Because yeah, that's 100% true, factual information. But mine's more of it's the peace. Jesus gives me a peace that I've never had before. And if you haven't experienced it, there's so many people that are just miserable people. And I feel if you could find a way to invite Jesus into your life, it can take that away. You can find a peace and a love and a joy in the trajectory of your life, because Jesus wants to bless you. Jesus wants to bless you. He wants to open up the doors and just give you these blessings, but you have to be able to accept him and to understand the value in that relationship. It's hard because there's, especially in prison, it's really hard, because sometimes I remember being called soft or wuss. You know what I mean? Sometimes there's people that don't really look at it. To me, I look at Jesus as tough. I don't look at Jesus as this soft little guy with a cane and long blonde hair. You know what I mean? The Jesus that I knew was flipping tables and it was swole. It was a carpenter with calloused hands, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So it's it's just how you got to look at it. But no,
Well, I think too is you said, it's not some genie that just makes all your problems go away. But the difference is that no matter what you face in life, you now have someone to face it with.
That's so good.
He's going to be in the pit with you. The empathy, anything and everything that you are tried with or tested with throughout your life, he's been tried with and tested with.
That's so good.
He's the only God that has lived and walked here on earth for the 33 years he was alive and experienced everything that you and I experienced. And then, like you said, ultimately crucified, raised from the dead to pay for our sins once and for all. And I know for me in my life, even as a leader of a ministry, I have faced tremendous heartache and trials and tribulations over the course of my last 20 years of my adult life. And the difference of me being an absolute train wreck versus overcoming the obstacles and being able to get through them is having him as someone that is walking alongside me through it all.
That's so good. And that makes me think of without Jesus, when I used to come to like bad things happen in my life, it would be all the why me? How could this happen to me? The victim mentality. But when you have Jesus, it changed to all right, God, what are you trying to teach me?
Yeah.
Like, what are you trying to teach me here? Because I know it's to better me, even though at the time it might not feel that way. But like, dude, prison, I've said this 3 times, I think, on this podcast. Prison was the best thing that ever happened to me. It changed my life for the better. And if you can try to like adapt that, and even if you're watching this and you're not ever getting out, God has a purpose for you right where you're at. And if you can dig into that relationship with Jesus and let him show you where it's at, it might just be to change other men's lives, to show other men Jesus or women Jesus while they're in there, so that they can then take it out and then change their family. I don't know.
And his promises are so true. I mean, Jeremiah 29:11, that he has purpose for your life, plans to prosper you. And that doesn't mean just on the outside. That doesn't mean with nice cars or nice house. I mean, I'm sure for some of us, all of those things will come, but it's truly about the fruits of the joy and the peace and the happiness that you can find no matter where you are at. And it's only obtainable through him.
That's so good.
Well, Shawn, thank you so much for joining this podcast.
Yeah.
I love hearing your story. Again, thank you for what you do. You turning your pain into purpose by being able to now pour into the young lives of at-risk kids. And again, if you're a listener and you have a heart for that, number one, I want to encourage you to get involved, whether that's physically or through prayer or financially, to help support the ministry that they have. And you can find those links on all of our different platforms. But thanks for being here with us today. And I love what God has done in and is now doing through you in your testimony. So appreciate it. It was an honor to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. Jake, you're awesome. Man, I've been following you for a long time. Grayson, thank you, man, for all, even behind the scenes. But yeah, no, this is great. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Heck yeah. Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the God Behind Bars podcast. And I just want to thank you as a listener for your continued support and encourage you to share this with as many of your friends and family as possible. It is our heart and goal to tell the story of what God is doing behind bars with as many people as possible. And so as you share this amongst your friends and family and on your social networks, it allows us and supports that goal. Number 2 is, if you would love to make a gift to God Behind Bars to help us continue the work and to grow the platform of what's happening here as a ministry, I want to encourage you to go over to godbehindbars.com/donate. And no matter what you can give, it all helps in making the mission and vision of introducing as many people to Jesus as we possibly can and connecting them to the local church. And so thank you so much again for being a listener. And we pray that this encourages you just as much as you've been an encouragement to us.